Chapter 1. Arrival on the Grand Canal. The Vaporetto cut through the pewter water of the Grand Canal with a low, rhythmic thrum, its prow slicing the mist that clung to Venice like a conspirator's veil. Hercule Poirot stood at the rail, one gloved hand gripping the brass bar, the other cradling the handle of his Malacca cane. His patent leather shoes gleamed beneath the hem of a perfectly pressed charcoal overcoat. His moustache, waxed to twin points of military precision, defied the damp that threatened every lesser follicle in the city. He inhaled brine, diesel, and the faint rot of centuries, and allowed himself a small, satisfied sigh. Venice, he reflected, was a city that wore its own mask, even in daylight. Behind him, a cluster of American tourists chattered about gelato and gondola selfies. Poirot paid them no mind. His grey-green eyes were fixed on the palazzi sliding past, facades of rose and ochre, their Gothic windows blind with shutters, their water gates yawning like dark mouths. Somewhere among these walls, he thought, a drama was already in motion. One did not summon Hercule Poirot to Venice for a mere holiday. The summons had arrived 3 days earlier, delivered by a liveried footman to his flat in London. A single sheet of heavy cream paper, watermarked with a tiny silver mask, bore an invitation in violet ink. Signor Hercule Poirot, your presence is requested at the Palazzo Contarini dal Zaffo for the bal masqué of the Order of the Saffron Veil. Saturday, 23rd October midnight until the unmasking bell. Come as you are, or as you dare. Il Conte Lorenzo di Falco. No explanation, no plea for assistance, only that postscript in a spidery hand. Death walks behind the mask. Poirot had turned the card over twice, sniffed the ink, bergamot and something metallic, then booked the Orient Simplon Express without hesitation. A puzzle presented itself. Poirot never refused a puzzle. The Vaporetto lurched against the Saint-Thomas landing. Poirot descended the gangplank with the delicate balance of a man who trusted neither wooden planks nor human nature. A porter in a crimson jacket materialized, bowing low. "Signor Poirot, the Count's launch awaits." The launch was a sleek mahogany sandalo, its brass fittings polished to sunlight. The boatman, a wiry Venetian with a gold hoop in one ear, said nothing as he handed Poirot aboard. They slipped beneath the Accademia Bridge, past the salmon-pink customs house, and into the narrower Rio di San Trovaso, where the water smelled of tar and secrets. Poirot sat beneath the felze canopy, cane across his knees, watching reflections fracture and reform. 20 minutes later, the launch nosed into a private mooring beneath a palazzo whose facade seemed to lean inward, as though eavesdropping on the canal. Ivy strangled the lower arches. Above, a row of Moorish windows glinted like suspicious eyes. A liveried footman, this one younger with a scar slicing his left eyebrow, offered a white-gloved hand. "Benvenuto, signore. The Count regrets he cannot greet you personally. Urgent business in the city." Poirot's eyebrow arched. Urgent business 2 days before his own masquerade. Most irregular. The footman's smile did not reach his eyes. "This way." They crossed a courtyard where a fountain trickled over the stone head of a weeping satyr. Inside, the palazzo breathed wealth and decay in equal measure. Frescoes flaking from damp, Murano chandeliers dripping wax onto Persian rugs, worn thin at the edges. A scent of beeswax and old roses hung in the air. Poirot's nostrils flared. Beneath the perfume lurked something sharper. Ozone, perhaps, or fear. He was shown to a suite on the Piano Nobile. The bedroom overlooked the canal, its ceiling painted with a riot of nymphs and satyrs frozen mid-revel. A fire crackled in a marble hearth carved with griffins. On the escritoire lay a second envelope, sealed in crimson wax with the same tiny mask. Poirot slit it open. "Welcome, little Belgian. Tonight you dine with the family. Tomorrow you choose your mask. Beware the man who wears none. L." He folded the note, slipped it into his waistcoat pocket, and crossed to the window. Across the canal, a gondola drifted past, its felser curtains drawn tight. For an instant the curtain twitched. A pale hand appeared, gloved in black lace, and dropped something small into the water. A splash, a ripple, gone. Poirot's moustache twitched. "Eh bien," he murmured, "the game begins." At 8 o'clock precisely, a soft knock announced dinner. The footman led him down a corridor lined with ancestral portraits. Men and women in ruffs and pearls. Every face half-shadowed, as though the painter had known their secrets. They descended a staircase of white Istrian stone into a dining room that could have seated 50, but held only 6. A long table glittered beneath candlelight, crystal, silver, a centrepiece of black orchids and peacock feathers. 5 faces turned as Poirot entered. At the head sat Conte Lorenzo di Falco, tall, silver-haired, dressed in midnight blue velvet. His eyes were the colour of tarnished bronze, and they assessed Poirot with the lazy confidence of a lion watching a mouse. To his right, a woman in emerald silk, Contessa Sophia, the Count's much younger wife, smiled with lips the shade of fresh blood. Beside her, a young man with the Count's cheekbones but none of his warmth. Niccolo, the heir, fingers drumming a silent tattoo on his wineglass. Opposite them sat an elderly woman swathed in black lace. Her face a roadmap of grief, Signora Giulia, the Count's aunt. And at the far end, half in shadow, a girl of perhaps 20, with hair the colour of burnt chestnuts, and eyes that never quite met anyone else's. Beatrice, the Contessa's cousin, or so the footman had whispered. "Signor Poirot!" The Count rose, arms wide. "You honour us." Poirot bowed. "The honour is mine, monsieur, though I confess your invitation was intriguingly cryptic." A ripple of laughter quickly stifled. The Contessa lifted her glass. "In Venice, nothing is ever as it seems. Even the wine lies." She sipped. The ruby liquid left a crescent on her lip like a wound. Dinner unfolded in a choreography of courses. Risotto nero black as midnight, quail stuffed with figs, a sorbetto that tasted faintly of almonds and something metallic Poirot could not place. Conversation danced on the surface, Carnival, the rising damp, the Americans who now owned half of Dossoduro, while beneath currents tugged. Niccolo spoke of restoring the family glassworks on Murano. "We produce the finest mirrors in Europe," he boasted, "but every mirror must have a flaw. Otherwise, the devil sees his reflection and stays." Signora Giulia crossed herself. "Do not jest about the devil, ragazzo. He listens." Beatrice said nothing at all. Her gaze remained fixed on the black orchids. One petal trembled each time she breathed. Poirot ate sparingly, observing. When the footman poured grappa, the Count raised his glass. "To masks," he toasted, "may they hide what must be hidden and reveal what must be known." Glasses clinked. Poirot's eyes flicked to Beatrice. Her hand shook so violently that grappa sloshed onto the lace tablecloth, staining it the colour of dried blood. Later, in his room, Poirot stood at the window again. The canal lay silver under a sickle moon. Somewhere below, a gondola oar dipped and rose, dipped and rose. He removed his gloves, flexed his fingers, and took from his valise a small leather notebook. On the first page, he wrote in neat slanted script, "Palazzo Contarini dal Zaffo, 21st October." Observations: the Count is afraid of something he will not name. The Contessa watches her husband when he is not watching her. Niccolò's drumming fingers, impatience or guilt. Signora Giulia fears the past more than the future. Beatrice trembles at orchids. Why? The note: beware the man who wears none. A warning or a threat? He underlined the last line twice, then closed the book. A soft scratch at the door. Poirot crossed the room in 3 silent steps and opened it a crack. Beatrice stood in the corridor, cloaked in shadow, a finger to her lips. "Signor," she whispered, voice brittle as spun glass, "the mask you will choose tomorrow, it must have sapphire eyes. Promise me." Before he could answer, footsteps echoed on the marble stairs. Beatrice vanished like smoke. Poirot closed the door, turned the key, and stood listening until the footsteps faded. Outside, the moon slipped behind a cloud, and the canal went black as ink. Somewhere in the palazzo, a clock struck 11 slow chimes. Poirot returned to the window. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure on the opposite balcony, a man in a crimson cloak, face hidden by a plain white boater mask. Then the mist swallowed him. Poirot drew the curtains, set his cane within reach, and lay fully dressed upon the bed. Sleep, he decided, would be a luxury he could not yet afford. Instead he listened. To the lap of water against stone, to the creak of old beams, to the heartbeat of a house that had not yet decided whether to welcome him or devour him. In the darkness, his moustache curved in the faintest of smiles. "Death behind the mask," he murmured. "We shall see whose face it wears." Chapter 2. The Invitation to the Masquerade. Hercule Poirot woke before the Campanile of San Marco had finished its 6 solemn strokes. Grey light seeped through the shutters, striping the frescoed ceiling like prison bars. He rose, performed his morning ablutions with military precision, and dressed in a dove-grey suit whose cut was, as always, a silent rebuke to the slovenly. His moustache received its daily communion of wax and comb. Only then did he open the leather notebook and add a single line beneath yesterday's observations. Beatrice's warning, sapphire eyes. A code or a plea? A discreet knock. The scarred footman entered bearing a silver tray. Espresso thick as tar, a single cornetto dusted with sugar, and a third envelope. This one sealed with black wax, impressed by a tiny silver mask. Poirot broke the seal. "My dear Monsieur Poirot, breakfast at your leisure, then join me in the library at 9. We have masks to choose and a death to prevent." El Poirot sipped the espresso, eyes narrowing. The Count's handwriting had grown hurried. The loops of the Y and G slashed downward like daggers. He finished the cornetto, wiped sugar from his fingers with a linen napkin, and descended. The library occupied the entire eastern wing of the piano nobile. Double doors of carved walnut opened onto a cavern of books. Leather spines cracked with age, ladders on brass rails, a scent of vellum and cigar smoke. A fire roared in a hearth flanked by marble lions. Conte Lorenzo di Falco stood before it, silhouetted against the flames, a crystal tumbler of something amber in his hand, despite the hour. "Buongiorno, Poirot." The Count did not turn. "Sleep well?" "Like a child who suspects the bogeyman under the bed," Poirot replied. "Tell me, monsieur, why is it you summon me 3,000 kilometers only to speak in riddles?" The Count laughed, a sound like dry leaves. "Because in Venice, riddles are currency." He gestured to a table where a dozen masks lay on black velvet. A silver columbina studded with sapphires, a medico della peste with a beak like a stork, a golden volto slashed with crimson feathers. "Choose." Poirot circled the table, gloved fingers hovering. You said a death to prevent. Whose? The Count's reflection in a nearby mirror looked suddenly older. Mine, perhaps, or someone dear to me. The Order of the Saffron Veil is particular. Every year at the Bal Masqué, one guest receives the black orchid. Tradition says that guest will not see another Carnivale. Superstition, Poirot sniffed. Superstition killed my father. The Count drained his glass. He received the orchid in 1897, found floating in the canal the next morning, throat cut, mask still on. Poirot lifted the sapphire-eyed Colombina. And you believe history repeats? I believe someone wants it to. The Count produced a small velvet pouch and spilled its contents. A dried flower, petals black as pitch, stamens the colour of dried blood. This arrived yesterday. No note, only the orchid. Poirot examined it beneath a magnifying lens he produced from his waistcoat. Nightshade family. Atropa belladonna concentrated into pigment. Beautiful and lethal if ingested. He returned the flower to its pouch. Tell me about the order. The Count paced. Founded in the 16th century by a cadre of noblemen who wished to conduct delicate negotiations without the inconvenience of faces. Membership is hereditary, invitation only. The masquerade is our annual conclave. This year we vote on selling the family glassworks to a consortium from Dubai. Niccolo favours the sale. I do not. Money, Poirot murmured, always money, and the Contessa. Sophia married me for the palazzo, not the patrimony. She spends faster than the tides rise. The Count's mouth twisted. Beatrice is her cousin, orphaned, taken in out of charity. The girl hears things, sees things. Last week she claimed to have seen a man in the attics wearing my father's mask, the one he died in. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And where is this mask now? Locked in the family chapel, or so I believed. The Count opened a drawer and withdrew a brass key on a red ribbon. 3rd floor, end of the east corridor. The door is iron. Take this. Poirot pocketed the key. You trust me with family relics? I trust you to keep breathing, the Count said grimly. There is more. Yesterday, a package arrived, addressed to you. He handed over a small box wrapped in brown paper. Poirot unwrapped it carefully. Inside, a miniature porcelain mask, no larger than a walnut, painted with tiny sapphire eyes. A pinprick hole pierced the forehead. Through it protruded a single black petal. Mon Dieu, Poirot breathed. The orchid grows even in miniature. Footsteps in the corridor. The Contessa swept in, fragrance of jasmine and danger preceding her. She wore riding breeches and a white blouse open at the throat. A crop tapped against her boot. Lorenzo, the gondola is waiting. Oh, Signor Poirot. Her smile could have cut glass. Choosing your disguise already? How delicious. Poirot inclined his head. Madame, one must always be prepared to meet one's public. She laughed, low and throaty, then turned to her husband. Niccolo has gone to Murano to inspect the furnaces. He wishes you to join him this afternoon. Tell my son I will consider it, the Count said. The Contessa's eyes flicked to the masks, lingered on the sapphire, Colombina, then to Poirot. Choose wisely, little detective. Some masks have teeth. She left as suddenly as she had come, the scent of jasmine lingering like a threat. The Count exhaled. You see the currents in this house? Currents? Poirot replaced the Colombina. I see whirlpools, monsieur, and someone is stirring the water. He spent the next hour in the library, cataloguing masks and motives. At 10 o'clock the scarred footman appeared again. Signorina Beatrice asks to see you in the chapel, signore. She says it is urgent. Poirot followed through corridors that grew narrower, ceilings lower, until they reached a heavy iron door studded with rivets. The footman unlocked it with a key from his belt, then retreated. Poirot entered alone. The chapel was a jewel box of Byzantine gloom, gold mosaics flickering in candlelight, incense curling like ghosts. Beatrice knelt before the altar, head bowed, but she rose as Poirot approached. "You came," she whispered. Her hands twisted a rosary of black glass beads. "Child, you risk much meeting me here." Poirot's voice was gentle. "Tell me what you know." She glanced at the door, then drew him behind a pillar. 3 nights ago I could not sleep. I walked the attics. There is a room behind the old nursery, locked always, but the lock was broken, inside. Her voice cracked. Inside was the mask. Grandfather's mask, the one from the canal. It was wet, with blood fresh. She pressed a handkerchief to her lips, and on the floor footprints, small like a woman's, leading to the window that opens onto the roof. Poirot's mind raced. "You told no one? Only you." Her eyes filled. "They will say I am mad, like my mother before they sent her away." A bell tolled from the campanile. 11 slow notes. Beatrice flinched. "I must go. The sapphire mask. Promise me." "I promise to consider all possibilities," Poirot said, which was as close to a promise as he ever gave. She slipped away through a side door. Poirot remained, studying the altar. Beneath the crucifix lay a velvet cushion, and on it, the unmistakable imprint of a mask, the fabric compressed as though something heavy had recently rested there. He was about to investigate further when a shadow detached itself from the confessional. Signora Julia emerged, black lace rustling like bat wings. "You meddle in things best left buried, Belgian." Her voice was gravel and grief. "My brother died because he asked too many questions. Take care you do not join him." Before Poirot could respond, she pressed something into his hand. A small brass key, identical to the one the Count had given him. "The real chapel door," she hissed. "The other opens to the crypt. Some secrets should stay drowned." She vanished into the gloom. Poirot examined the new key. It was warm, as though recently held. He pocketed it, then noticed on the floor a single black petal, identical to the orchids. It had not been there moments before. Outside, the chapel door stood ajar. Through it drifted the sound of voices, Nicoleau's tenor, sharp with anger, and another deeper, unfamiliar. Poirot crept closer. "The vote is tomorrow night," Nicoleau was saying. "If father refuses, we lose everything." "Then make him refuse no longer," the stranger replied. The accent was Venetian, but educated, aristocratic. "The black orchid has been delivered. Tradition will do the rest." Poirot peered around the doorframe. Nicoleau stood with his back to him, speaking to a man in a crimson cloak, the same figure Poirot had glimpsed from his window. The man's face was hidden by a plain white boater mask. "Tradition is a slow poison," Nicoleau said. "I prefer certainty." The masked man laughed softly. "Then provide it. The detective is a complication, but complications can be removed." Nicoleau hesitated. "Poirot is not a man to underestimate. Nor am I." The masked man turned, and for an instant Poirot saw his eyes through the mask's slits, pale, almost colourless, like winter ice. Then the man melted into the corridor's shadows. Nicoleau followed. Their footsteps faded. Poirot waited a full minute, then emerged. The corridor was empty, but on the wall hung a mirror in a gilt frame. In its reflection, Poirot saw something that made his blood run cold. The iron door to the chapel stood open, but behind him, in the glass, it was closed. And in that closed door stood the reflection of a third figure, cloaked in black, face hidden by a porcelain mask with sapphire eyes. Poirot whirled. The corridor was empty. He returned to the library, heart beating a measured tattoo. The Count was gone. On the table lay the sapphire Colombina, and pinned to its forehead by a tiny silver dagger was a fresh black orchid, its petals still dewed with canal water. Beneath it, a new note in the Count's hurried script. The vote has been moved to tonight. The masquerade begins at sunset. Choose your mask, Monsieur Poirot, and pray the one who wears none does not choose you. Poirot lifted the mask. Inside the lining, stitched in crimson thread, were the words Occhi di Zaffiro vedono la verità. Sapphire eyes see the truth. He closed his fist around the mask, feeling the weight of centuries in its curves. Somewhere in the palazzo, a clock began to strike noon, each chime a hammer on the anvil of fate. Poirot straightened his tie, adjusted his moustache, and spoke to the empty room. Eh bien, let the masquerade begin. Chapter 3. Whispers behind silk masks. The sun bled into the lagoon at 5:30, turning the sky the colour of bruised peaches. From the Palazzo Contarini dal Zaffo, gondolas ferried guests across the darkening water like black beetles on a mirror. Lanterns flickered to life along the watergate, their reflections trembling as if afraid to be seen. Inside the palazzo, mirrors had been draped in crimson silk. Superstition claimed that uncovered glass at a masquerade invited the devil to dance. Hercule Poirot stood before a pier-glass in his bedroom, adjusting the sapphire-eyed Colombina. The mask was lighter than expected, its silk lining cool against his skin. He had rejected the traditional boater, too bulky, too anonymous, and the Medico della Peste, too theatrical. This half-mask left his mouth free to speak, to taste, to lie if necessary. He slipped the black orchid into an inner pocket, then donned a cloak of midnight velvet lined with saffron silk. The little cells of his brain buzzed like bees in a hive. A soft knock. The scarred footman entered, eyes averted from Poirot's reflection. "Guests are arriving, signore. The Count requests your presence in the Sala da Ballo." Poirot followed through corridors now lit by 1,000 candles in Murano sconces. Music drifted upward. Violins, a harpsichord, the low throb of a theorbo, mingling with laughter that sounded too bright, too brittle. They descended the grand staircase into a ballroom transformed. The ceiling had been hung with hundreds of silk masks, each suspended by invisible thread, so they appeared to float like ghostly faces. The floor was a chessboard of black and white marble. At its centre stood a fountain where champagne cascaded over a statue of Cupid, blindfolded with a black ribbon. Guests milled in constellations of colour. A harlequin whose diamonds glittered with real gems. A queen of the night whose gown was sewn with tiny mirrors. A Pierrot whose white face paint cracked when he smiled. Poirot paused on the threshold, cataloguing. 23 guests by his count, plus the family. The Order of the Saffron Veil required odd numbers for voting. 29 in total, then. He noted the absence of Niccolo and the Contessa, late or avoiding the crowd. A hand touched his elbow. Beatrice, swathed in silver gauze, wore a mask of beaten gold shaped like a moth. Her eyes behind it were huge, pupils dilated. "You came," she breathed. "The sapphire! Patience, child." Poirot guided her to an alcove, where a fresco of Venus and Mars provided partial cover. "Tell me what you see." She trembled. "The man with no mask, he is here. I felt him. And the mirrors? They took the mirrors down because he hates them." Poirot's gaze swept the room. Every face was hidden, yet he sensed a vacancy, a space where a presence should be but wasn't. Describe him. Tall, cloak the colour of dried blood, voice like gravel, in honey. She clutched his sleeve. He spoke to Niccolo in the chapel. I heard them again this afternoon, behind the tapestry in the Salle d'Armée. Something about the vote, and a blade. Before Poirot could press her, a gong sounded, 3 deep notes that silenced conversation. The Count appeared on a dais beneath a canopy of saffron silk, dressed as a doge in robes of gold brocade, his volto mask a perfect oval of white porcelain. At his side, the Contessa glittered as Salome, her gown a cascade of emerald scales, a silver tray balanced on one palm bearing a single black orchid. "Fratelli e sorelle," the Count intoned, voice amplified by the mask's acoustics. "Welcome to the bal masqué of the Order of the Saffron Veil. Tonight we dance with truth and deception. Tonight we vote on the fate of our legacy. But first," he lifted the orchid, "let the black orchid choose its bearer." A collective intake of breath. The Count released the flower. It drifted downward on a hidden wire, spinning slowly. Guests stepped back, forming a circle. The orchid descended, then halted before a figure in a crimson cloak whose face was hidden not by a mask, but by a hood pulled low. The man with no mask. He caught the orchid without looking up. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The Count's porcelain face betrayed nothing, but his knuckles whitened on the sceptre he carried. "Let the dancing begin," the Contessa cried, and the musicians struck up a pavane. Couples formed, masks brushing masks. Poirot watched the crimson figure melt into the throng. He was about to follow when a gloved hand caught his wrist. Signora Giulia, dressed as a mourning widow, her black lace mask veined with silver tears. "You must stop this," she hissed. "The vote is a trap. Lorenzo plans to refuse the sale, but Niccolo has the numbers. If the Count dies tonight, dies," Poirot's voice was sharp. "You know this how?" She pressed a folded paper into his hand. "From the crypt. Read it later. Now, watch the fountain." She vanished into the crowd. Poirot slipped the paper into his pocket beside the orchid, then moved toward the champagne fountain. The Cupid statue's blindfold had slipped. One stone eye now stared directly at him. Beneath the cascade, something glinted, metal, perhaps, or glass. He was reaching for it when the lights dimmed to a sultry amber. The music shifted to a waltz, languid and dangerous. A woman in a peacock mask appeared at his side, tall, graceful, scent of jasmine unmistakable. "Dance with me, little detective," the Contessa murmured. Poirot allowed himself to be led into the whirl. Her hand was cool through his glove. Her eyes behind the mask were green as absinthe. "You play a dangerous game, madame," he said as they turned. "Your husband speaks of death, your stepson of money, your cousin of blood in the attic, and you. I speak of pleasure." She spun him beneath the floating masks. "Tell me, have you chosen your role tonight? Hero, fool, sacrifice? I'm always Poirot." He guided her closer to the fountain. "Tell me about the man in crimson." Her step faltered, only for an instant. "A ghost story. Every carnival needs one." "Ghosts do not deliver orchids." They passed beneath a chandelier. Crystals chimed like tiny bells. "Nor do they vote on glassworks." The music swelled. Around them, couples moved in perfect synchrony. Yet Poirot sensed eyes watching from every mask. The waltz ended. The Contessa released him with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Find Niccolo," she said. "He has something you will want to see." Then she was gone, swallowed by feathers and silk. Poirot made his way to the fountain. The glint was a small silver vial, half submerged in champagne. He palmed it, empty, but the residue inside smelled of bitter almonds, cyanide. A scream cut through the music. The crowd parted. On the black marble square lay Beatrice, silver gown pooled like moonlight, moth mask askew. Her lips were blue, foam flecked the corners of her mouth. The black orchid from the crimson figure's hand now rested on her breast, its petals crushed. "Poison!" someone shouted. Chaos erupted. Guests surged toward the doors, but liveried footmen blocked the exits with crossed halberds. The Count leapt from the dais, porcelain mask cracking as he knelt beside Beatrice. "She breathes!" he cried. "Fetch the doctor!" Poirot was already there, fingers at the girl's throat, pulse thready but present. He sniffed her lips, amaretto and something sharper. Not cyanide, something faster. He pried open her mouth. On her tongue lay a single black petal, half dissolved. "Belladonna," he muttered, "concentrated extract. She will live if we act quickly." He looked up at the footman. "Carry her to the library. Fresh air, cold water. Move!" As Beatrice was lifted, her hand opened. A small key fell to the floor. Brass, identical to the two Poirot already carried. He pocketed it as the Count followed the procession, face ashen beneath the broken mask. The ballroom emptied into corridors, guests whispering behind fans. Poirot lingered, scanning the crowd. The crimson figure had vanished. He slipped through a side door into the salle d'armes, a long room lined with ancestral weapons. Rapiers, arquebuses, a Saracen scimitar curved like a smile. At the far end, behind a tapestry depicting the Battle of Lepanto, he found Niccolo arguing with a man in a harlequin mask whose diamonds were definitely paste. "Cannot proceed without the final vote," Niccolo was saying, voice tight. "The girl was a warning," Harlequin replied. "Next time it will be the Count. You have the poison? Enough to stop a horse." Niccolo noticed Poirot and froze. "You?" "Me," Poirot agreed pleasantly. "Though I confess, monsieur, your taste in associates is questionable." Harlequin laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and fled through a servant's door. Niccolo started after him, but Poirot blocked his path. "Your cousin lies near death," he said, "yet you discuss poison as if choosing wine." Niccolo's mask was a simple domino. Sweat beaded beneath it. "Beatrice is hysterical. Always has been. This is theatre." "Theatre does not leave foam on the lips." Poirot stepped closer. "Where is the man in crimson?" "I don't." Niccolo's denial was cut short by a crash from the ballroom. They ran back to find the champagne fountain overturned, Cupid's head severed, champagne and blood mingling on the marble. No body, only a single playing card pinned beneath the statue's hand. The Queen of Spades, her face scratched out, replaced by a crude drawing of a mask with sapphire eyes. Poirot's blood ran cold. The Contessa's voice drifted from the dais, unnaturally calm. "The vote will proceed at midnight," she announced to the remaining guests. "The order's traditions must be honoured. Until then, enjoy the dance." The musicians, pale but professional, struck up a sarabande. Couples reformed as if nothing had happened. Venetian etiquette. Death was merely an inconvenient guest. Poirot retreated to the library where Beatrice lay on a chaise, colour returning to her cheeks. The Count paced, porcelain shards discarded, face naked and afraid. "She says the man in crimson gave her the orchid," he told Poirot, "said it was from you." "Lies travel faster than truth," Poirot replied. He examined Beatrice's pupils, dilated but responsive. "She will recover, but we have perhaps 1 hour before the vote." He unfolded Signora Giulia's paper, a crude map of the palazzo, with an X marked in the crypt beneath the chapel. Beneath it, in spidery script, the real black orchid grows where the first Contarini died. The Count stared. My ancestor, drowned in the crypt during the 1348 plague. The family sealed it. Sealed doors open for those with keys, Poirot said. He now held 3 identical brass keys. Tell me, monsieur, how many exist? Only one, the Count whispered, destroyed after the sealing. Then we have a problem. A clock chimed 11. 1 hour until midnight. 1 hour until the vote. 1 hour until the next death. Poirot adjusted his mask, feeling the sapphire eyes settle into place like chips of ice. Come, he said, we descend to the crypt, and we bring the little grey cells. As they left the library, a final detail caught Poirot's eye. On the mantelpiece, where a clock should tick, sat a 4th brass key, newly polished, waiting. Behind his mask, Hercule Poirot smiled without humour. The game of masks had become a game of keys, and somewhere in the darkness, the man who wore none was turning the lock. Chapter 4. The Fatal Waltz. The Palazzo's great clock struck 11:30, with the solemnity of a judge passing sentence. In the ballroom, the saraband had dissolved into a languid waltz, all silk skirts and whispered betrayals. Couples revolved beneath the floating masks like planets in a doomed constellation. The air was thick with beeswax perfume and the copper tang of fear. Hercule Poirot stood at the foot of the grand staircase, 4 brass keys heavy in his pocket. The Count had vanished into the throng, porcelain mask replaced by a plain black domino that made him look younger, almost vulnerable. Beatrice lay upstairs under the doctor's care. Niccolo had not reappeared since the fountain incident. The Contessa, glittering like a serpent, moved from guest to guest, her silver tray now empty, save for a single black petal. Poirot's sapphire eyes flicked to the crypt door, hidden behind a tapestry of the Last Judgment, its iron frame barely visible. The 4th key on the mantelpiece had been a taunt, an invitation. He was about to move when a hand clamped his shoulder. Dance with me, Poirot. Niccolo's voice was hoarse behind a harlequin mask patched with real diamonds. 1 turn before the end. Poirot allowed himself to be led into the swirl. Niccolo's grip was fever-hot. His breath smelled of grappa and desperation. You are reckless, monsieur, Poirot murmured as they turned. Poison in the fountain, blood on the marble, yet you waltz as if tomorrow is guaranteed. Niccolo's laugh cracked. Tomorrow is a vote, tonight is theatre. He spun Poirot beneath a chandelier. Crystals chimed like breaking ice. Father clings to tradition. I cling to survival. The glassworks bleed money. Dubai offers salvation. Salvation purchased with a black orchid? Poirot's tone was mild. Hey, your cousin nearly paid the price. Beatrice talks too much. Niccolo's eyes behind the mask were bloodshot. She saw things she shouldn't, heard things, such as the music swelled. Around them, masks brushed masks, silk whispering secrets. Poirot caught sight of the crimson figure at the edge of the floor, hood low, hands gloved in black leather. The man raised one hand. In it glinted a small glass vial, identical to the one from the fountain. Niccolo followed Poirot's gaze. He's early, he muttered. Early for what? The waltz ended in a flourish of violins. Couples applauded politely. The lights dimmed further until only the floating masks above were visible, glowing like malevolent moons. A single spotlight illuminated the dais where the Contessa now stood alone, tray raised. Fratelli, she called, voice honey over steel. The hour approaches. Before the vote, let us honour tradition with the fatal waltz. One couple will dance beneath the black orchid. One couple will not see dawn. A collective gasp. From the ceiling descended a wire cage containing a single black orchid, its petals trembling. The cage lowered until it hung 3 feet above the marble square where Beatrice had fallen. The Count appeared at Poirot's side, face pale beneath the domino. "This was not planned," he whispered. "The fatal waltz is legend, not ritual." "Legends are useful to killers," Poirot replied. He scanned the crowd. 29 masks, 29 heartbeats, 1 absent. The Contessa clapped twice. The musicians struck up a waltz in a minor key. Slow, inevitable, the melody of a funeral march disguised as romance. Couples hesitated, then paired off, drawn by tradition's inexorable pull. The crimson figure stepped forward, hood thrown back to reveal not a face, but another mask. Plain white porcelain, featureless save for 2 slits for eyes. He extended a gloved hand to the Contessa. She accepted with a smile that could curdle milk. They took the floor beneath the orchid cage, moving with predatory grace. The other couples formed a circle around them, a living clock counting down to midnight. Poirot felt the weight of the keys like stones. "Monsieur," he said to the Count, "the crypt, now." They slipped through the tapestry as the waltz reached its crescendo. Behind them, the ballroom dissolved into a kaleidoscope of colour and shadow. The corridor to the chapel was deserted, candles guttering in their sconces. The iron door stood ajar. Someone had been here recently. Poirot produced the first key, the Count's. It turned with a groan. They descended a spiral stair of worn stone, the air growing colder, damper, smelling of earth and old bones, and at the bottom, a vaulted chamber lit by a single torch. The crypt was smaller than expected. 6 sarcophagi in 2 rows, each carved with the Contarini crest. In the centre stood a stone plinth. On it, a glass dome covering, what else? A black orchid, roots tangled in what looked like human hair. "My ancestor," the Count breathed, "preserved since the plague." Poirot approached. Beneath the dome, the orchid's petals were fresh, dewed with moisture. A tiny plaque read, "Atropa Contarini, 1348. He lifted the dome. The scent was cloying, funereal. "Beautiful," he murmured, "and lethal, the source of your family's poison." Footsteps on the stairs. They turned as Niccolo appeared. Harlequin mask gone, face slick with sweat. "You're too late," he panted. "The vote is happening now. Father, sign the papers, or what?" The Count's voice cracked like a whip. "You would kill your own blood for Dubai gold?" Niccolo's hand trembled as he drew a dagger from his sleeve. Small, curved Murano glass handle. "I would save us." Poirot stepped between them. "Put it down, monsieur. Murder is a poor investment." Niccolo's eyes darted to the orchid. "1 petal in the wine, and the vote is mine. The order will accept tradition." He lunged, not at the Count, but at Poirot. The detective sidestepped with surprising agility. The dagger sliced only air. The Count seized his son's wrist, twisting until the blade clattered to the stone. "Enough!" the Count roared. "You disgrace 4 centuries of—" A scream echoed from above, high and terrible. The waltz had stopped mid-phrase. They ran, up the stairs, through the chapel, into the ballroom where chaos reigned. The circle of dancers had broken. Guests clustered around the marble square. The orchid cage lay shattered, petals scattered like drops of ink. In the centre lay the Contessa, emerald scales stained crimson, the glass dagger buried to its hilt beneath her breastbone. Her peacock mask had cracked. 1 green eye stared sightlessly at the ceiling. The featureless white mask stood over her, hood thrown back to reveal nothing. The porcelain was blank, but where a mouth should be, a single black petal had been glued. The Count fell to his knees beside his wife. "Sophia!" Poirot knelt, fingers at her throat. No pulse. He examined the dagger. Nicolo's, the one from the crypt. But Nicolo stood behind him, hands empty, face drained of colour. "I didn't," Nicolo began. "Silence." Poirot's voice cut like a scalpel. He studied the scene. The Contessa's right hand clutched a torn scrap of saffron silk. Her left held the silver tray, now bent, a smear of blood forming the shape of a mask. The guests were frozen, masks reflecting candlelight like 1,000 guilty consciences. Poirot rose. "The fatal waltz," he announced, "has claimed its victim, but not by fate, by design." He turned to the white-masked figure. "Remove it." The figure did not move. Then, slowly, gloved hands rose to the porcelain. The mask came away to reveal Signora Giulia, black lace torn, eyes wild with triumph and terror. "You!" The Count staggered to his feet. "Aunt!" "She was never loyal," Giulia spat. "Your father's mistress, yes, but never family. The Contarini blood is poison. I have waited 50 years to prune the tree." She held up a second dagger, identical to the first, but stained with fresh blood. Sophia was greedy. She agreed to help for a price. When she demanded more, I gave her tradition. Poirot's mind raced. The torn saffron silk, the Count's robe, the bent tray deflected the first blow. Giulia had struck during the waltz's final turn, using the crowd's distraction. "But the orchid cage," Nicolo stammered. "It descended on you. A sleight of hand," Poirot said. "The cage was rigged to lower at the exact moment. Madame la Contessa was meant to die beneath it, framed as the black orchid's bearer. But Giulia is impatient." Giulia laughed, a sound like breaking bells. "The vote will proceed. With Lorenzo grieving, Niccolò will sign. The glassworks will be sold, and the Contarini name will finally—" She lunged at the Count, dagger raised. Poirot moved faster, his cane hooking her ankle. She fell hard, the dagger skittering across the marble. Footmen seized her arms. The Count stared at his aunt as if seeing her for the first time. "You killed my father, the canal, the musk." Giulia's smile was terrible. "He refused to sell then, too. Some lessons must be taught in blood." Poirot retrieved the fallen dagger, wrapping it in a handkerchief. "The police will be summoned. But first," he turned to the guests, "the vote is cancelled. The Order of the Saffron Veil dissolves tonight. Venice has enough ghosts." "Ay," murmur of assent. The floating masks above seemed to nod in agreement. As Giulia was led away, still laughing, Poirot noticed something beneath the Contessa's body. A small brass key, the fifth, attached to a ribbon soaked in blood. He pocketed it without comment. The Count sank onto a chair, head in hands. Niccolò stood apart, staring at his mother's body as if it were a stranger's. Poirot adjusted his sapphire mask, feeling the weight of truths revealed and truths still hidden. The waltz was over, but the music lingered in his mind, a minor key, unresolved. Outside, the campanile struck 12. Midnight, the unmasking bell, but in the Palazzo Contarini dal Zaffo, some masks would never come off. Chapter 5. Echoes from the Palazzo's past. The Palazzo did not sleep. It merely lowered its eyelids. At 2:30 in the morning, the great chandelier in the ballroom had been extinguished, yet candle stubs still guttered in wall sconces, throwing long, wavering shadows across the blood-stained marble. The Contessa's body lay beneath a velvet pall in the chapel, awaiting the medical examiner. Giulia had been locked in the old wine cellar. Iron gate, 2 footmen, no key. The guests of the order had been herded into the library under polite house arrest. Venice's police launch would not arrive until dawn. The fog was thick as felt. Hercule Poirot stood alone on the Portego, the long central hall on the Piano Nobile. surrounded by ancestral portraits whose eyes followed him like jurors. 5 brass keys lay on a silver salver before him, each identical save for minute differences in wear. A 6th key, the blood-soaked one from the Contessa's hand, rested in his waistcoat pocket, warm as a living thing. He spoke aloud, his voice soft but precise. 6 keys for 1 lock, or 6 locks for 1 truth. We shall see. Behind him, the Count appeared, barefoot in shirt-sleeves, the black domino mask dangling from one hand like a dead bird. His face was grey. "She is really gone," he said, as though testing the words. "Sophia. I hated her spending, her lovers, her laughter at funerals, yet she is gone." Poirot inclined his head. "Grief is a country with many borders, monsieur. Tonight we cross several." He indicated the keys. "Your aunt spoke of pruning the family tree. Pruning requires tools. These are tools." The Count stared. "The crypt key was unique. My father melted the mould. Yet here are 6. Poirot picked one up, turning it beneath a candle. "Observe the patina. This one, centuries old. This one, newly cast, the brass still bright. Someone has been busy." A door creaked. Beatrice drifted in, wrapped in a man's dressing gown 3 sizes too large, hair loose, eyes enormous without the moth mask. She carried a leather-bound ledger, its cover cracked and salt-stained. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered. "The attics. I went back. The room behind the nursery. It's open again." She laid the ledger on the salver. The title, embossed in faded gold, read Libro dei Segreti, Contarini dal Zaffo, 1572 to 1897. Poirot opened it with reverence. Pages of spidery Italian, illuminations of masks, diagrams of the palazzo's hidden passages. On the final entry, dated 12th October 1897, the night the Count's father died, was a charcoal sketch. A man in a crimson cloak, face obscured by a plain white boater, holding a black orchid. Beneath, a single line, Il custode senza volto prende ciò che è promesso. The guardian without a face takes what is promised, Poirot translated. He turned to Beatrice. "You found this in the attic?" "With the mask," she said. "Grandfather's mask. It's dry now. But the blood, it spelled something on the floor." She produced a photograph, taken with a small Kodak, the image grainy but legible. On the attic's dusty boards, dark letters, S-A-P-H-I-R. Poirot's moustache bristled. "Sapphire eyes! Your warning!" The Count's hand trembled as he touched the photograph. "My father wrote that the custode was a myth, a story to frighten children who pried into order affairs." "Myths, myths," Poirot said, "are history wearing a mask." He selected the oldest key and led them upward, through corridors that narrowed like veins. On the 3rd floor, the air smelled of pigeon droppings and centuries of damp. The nursery door stood ajar. Inside, moonlight spilled through a broken skylight onto a chaos of broken toys, moth-eaten rocking horses, a doll's house whose facade had been smashed to reveal tiny furnished rooms. Beatrice pointed to a panel in the wainscoting. Poirot pressed. It swung inward on silent hinges. A narrow passage, barely shoulder-wide, sloped downward. Cobwebs brushed their faces like ghostly fingers. 20 steps later, they emerged into a circular chamber no larger than a confessional. The walls were lined with niches. In each rested a porcelain mask, white, featureless, identical to the one Julia had worn. There were 13 in all. A stone pedestal in the centre held a velvet cushion. On it lay the death mask, plaster cast of a man's face, eyes closed, mouth slack, a jagged crack across the forehead where the canal bottom had struck. The Count recoiled. "Papa!" Poirot lifted the mask with care. Beneath it, carved into the pedestal, was a keyhole. He tried the oldest key. It turned with a soft click. A drawer slid open, revealing a yellow document sealed with black wax and a tiny silver mask. The Count broke the seal with shaking fingers. The paper was a deed, dated 1572, granting the Contarini family perpetual ownership of the glassworks. On condition that every century, one male heir must offer the black orchid to the custode, or forfeit all. Beneath, in a different ink, a codicil added in 1897, refusal equals death. The guardian collects. Beatrice's voice was a thread. Grandfather refused to sell. He was going to dissolve the order. So the custode came. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And now history repeats, with variations. But who is the custode tonight? Julia is in the cellar. The Contessa is dead. Niccolo. He stopped. Where is Niccolo? They had not seen the heir since the ballroom. The Count's face drained of what little colour remained. The vote! He still has the papers. They raced downward, footsteps echoing like gunshots. On the piano, Nobile, the library doors stood open. Inside, the remaining guests sat in stunned silence, guarded by footmen. Niccolo was not among them. Poirot's gaze swept the room and fixed on a tapestry depicting the wedding at Cana. One corner fluttered, as though recently disturbed. He crossed, drew it aside. A small door, almost invisible, stood ajar. Beyond, stone stairs spiralling into darkness. The old counting-house, the Count breathed. My father's study, sealed since his death. Poirot selected the newest key, the bright brass one. It fit. The door opened with a sigh. The study was a time capsule. Ledgers stacked like bricks, a partner's desk the size of a barge, a Murano chandelier draped in cobwebs. Moonlight filtered through slatted shutters, striping the room in prison bars. On the desk lay the sale contract, unsigned, and beside it a fresh black orchid in a crystal vase. Niccolo stood at the window, back to them, staring out at the canal. He wore the crimson cloak. Figlio mio, the Count said softly. It is finished. Niccolo turned. Beneath the hood, his face was streaked with tears, but his eyes were steady. No, Papa, it is just beginning. He raised his right hand. In it, the Contessa's silver tray now polished to a mirror. Reflected in it was not Niccolo's face, but the white porcelain mask, featureless, terrible. The Count gasped. Beatrice whimpered. Poirot alone remained calm. An old trick, he said. The mirror tray, the cloak, the mask hidden beneath. You played the custode in the ballroom, yes? Julia struck the blow, but you arranged the stage. Niccolo's reflected mouth curved. Julia was useful. Sophia was greedy. You, Monsieur Poirot, are inconvenient. He stepped forward. The cloak parted to reveal the curved glass dagger. Clean now, gleaming. One signature, he said to his father, and the custode vanishes forever. Refuse, and the legend claims another Contarini. The Count looked at the contract, then at his son. You would kill me for furnaces. I would save us from ruin. Niccolo's voice cracked. The Order's wealth is a fairy tale. Debts drown us. Dubai pays in gold. Poirot's mind raced, cataloguing the 6 keys, the ledger, the masks, the deed. Something was missing. He glanced at the chandelier. One crystal drop was missing, replaced by a tiny lens. A camera obscura. Someone had been watching. He spoke conversationally. Tell me, monsieur, when did you first wear the white mask? As a boy, playing? In the attics? Or later, when ambition grew teeth? Niccolo's reflection flickered. The tray trembled. You know nothing. I know the custode is always a Contarini, Poirot said. The deed says the heir must offer the orchid, but it does not say he must die. A clever boy could interpret offer as deliver death to another. Your grandfather refused to play, so you played for him. Beatrice found her voice. You poisoned me. "A warning," Niccolo said. "You were never the target." The Count stepped between his son and Poirot. "Enough! I will sign nothing. The glassworks rot, but honor is a luxury for the dead." Niccolo lunged. Poirot was faster. His cane hooked the chandelier's chain. He yanked. The entire fixture crashed down in a storm of crystal and dust. Niccolo staggered, blinded. The tray flew from his hand, shattering against the desk. In the chaos, Poirot seized the contract and the orchid vase. The Count wrestled his son to the floor, pinning his arms. Beatrice ran for the footman. Minutes later, Niccolo was bound with curtain cords, the crimson cloak discarded like a shedskin. The white mask lay cracked in 2 pieces, revealing nothing but plaster. Poirot stood over him. "You mistaken legend for license, monsieur. The custode was never immortal, merely patient." Dawn crept through the shutters, painting the room the colour of weak tea. The police launch sounded its horn in the canal. Poirot gathered the 6 keys, the ledger, the deed, and the broken mask. "One mystery remains," he said. "Who cast the extra keys? Who photographed the attic? Someone else pulls strings." He looked at the Count. "Your household is larger than you know." As the police clattered up the stairs, Poirot slipped the blood-soaked 6th key into the Count's hand. "Keep this one close, monsieur. The palazzo still breathes, and somewhere in its lungs a secret waits to exhale." Outside, the fog began to lift. Venice stirred, masks discarded in the light of day. But Poirot knew the city's true face was never the one it showed the sun. Chapter 6. Clues in the moonlit canals. Dawn had barely bled across the lagoon when Hercule Poirot stepped into a black sandalo at the palazzo's watergate. The fog still clung to the canal like a guilty secret, and the only sounds were the slap of water against stone and the muffled toll of a distant bell. The boatman, a silent hooded figure hired by the scarred footman, pushed off with a single oar, guiding them into the narrow Rio di San Trovaso. Poirot sat forward, gloved hands on his cane, eyes scanning the darkness. In his pocket, the 6 brass keys, the cracked white mask, the blood-soaked ribbon key, and a folded sheet torn from the Libro dei Segreti. A map of the palazzo's hidden water doors, marked with tiny silver masks. One door, at the canal's edge beneath the old glassworks warehouse, was circled in red. "Là," Poirot murmured, "the throat of the beast." The boatman nodded once and steered left into a tunnel so low the fog itself seemed to scrape the hull. They emerged into a wider canal where the water reflected the first pale light. On the left bank rose the warehouse, 3 stories of crumbling brick, windows blind with boards, the Contarini crest barely visible above a rusted iron door, half submerged at high tide. The boatman tied up to a moss-slick ring. Poirot stepped onto a narrow ledge, cane-tapping stone. The door was locked, but the newest brass key, the bright one, turned with a soft click. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of brine, molten sand, and something sweeter, jasmine. A single lantern hung from a beam, its flame guttering in the draught. The warehouse floor was a maze of abandoned furnaces, their mouths black as graves. Crates stamped Dubai, fragile, stood in neat rows, lids pried open to reveal packing straw and the glint of mirrored glass. Poirot lifted one sheet, a perfect circle, flawless, the Contarini mark etched in the centre. "Mirrors," he said aloud, "always mirrors." He moved deeper. In the far corner, a wooden staircase spiraled upward. Halfway up, a splash, soft, deliberate. Poirot froze. Another splash, then the creak of oars. Someone was leaving by a second water door. He raced upward, 2 steps at a time. The upper floor was a single vast room, moonlight pouring through broken skylights onto a sea of glass. Sheets, shards, whole panes stacked like playing cards, and at the centre stood a workbench littered with tools. Diamond cutters, silver solder, a tiny blowtorch. On it lay a half-finished mask, white porcelain, featureless, but the eye slits were being inlaid with sapphires. Poirot's breath caught. Sapphire eyes see the truth. Beneath the bench, a trapdoor stood open. He descended a ladder into a narrow chamber that ran directly beneath the canal. The walls wept moisture. The floor was a foot deep in black water. A sandolo bobbed at a hidden dock, its painter still warm from a hand. On the dock, a single black petal, fresh, and a brass key, 7th in the series, its bow shaped like a tiny mask. Poirot pocketed both. He examined the boat, empty save for a folded crimson cloak and a silver tray, the Contessa's, dented but polished. Someone had used this route to move unseen between palazzo and warehouse, between murder and motive. A soft scrape behind him. He whirled, cane raised. Beatrice stood in the shadows, barefoot, wrapped in a man's greatcoat, hair wild. "You followed me," Poirot said. It was not a question. "I saw you leave," she whispered. "The boatman. He works for Niccolo. I bribed him with my mother's ring." She held up a small gold band. "There's more. Down here." She led him along a submerged ledge to a rusted iron grate. Beyond it, a tunnel barely wide enough for a child. Poirot shone his pocket torch. The beam caught a glint of metal, a padlock, new, securing a wooden box. The 7th key fit. Inside, a ledger bound in red leather, pages filled with numbers, dates, names. The last entry dated yesterday. Payment to G, got 50,000 lire. Final delivery, mirror room, midnight. Custode mask, /7 complete. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "G. Julia, but she is locked away." Beatrice shook her head. "There's another G. Look." She turned the page. A charcoal sketch. A woman in a mourning veil, face obscured, holding a black orchid. Beneath, La Guardiana. "The guardian's wife," Poirot translated, "or widow. Someone continues the legend." A distant horn, the police launch, finally cutting through the fog. Time was running out. They returned to the warehouse floor. Poirot examined the mirrors more closely. One sheet, larger than the rest, leaned against a crate. Its surface was not glass but polished obsidian, black, depthless. In its reflection, Poirot saw not himself, but the ballroom. The floating masks, the shattered orchid cage, the Contessa's body. The image flickered, then showed the crypt, the stone plinth, the glass dome, the orchid with roots in hair. "A camera obscura," he breathed. "Hidden lenses in every room, projecting here. Someone watched everything." He tapped the obsidian. It swung aside on silent hinges, revealing a narrow corridor lined with more mirrors, each reflecting a different room in the palazzo. At the end, a door painted with the Contarini crest, locked. The blood-soaked ribbon key turned with a soft snick. The room beyond was a perfect cube, walls, floor, and ceiling mirrored. In the centre stood a single chair. On it sat a mask, white porcelain, sapphire eyes, mouth painted with a single black petal. Beside it, a note in elegant script, "For the final unmasking, come alone." G. Poirot's reflection multiplied into infinity, each Poirot holding the mask, each mask staring back with sapphire accusation. He felt the weight of centuries in that gaze. Beatrice's voice came from the corridor, trembling. "Signor, the water, it's rising." He turned. The canal had breached the warehouse's lower door. Black water lapped at the stairs, carrying with it the crimson cloak, now sodden and heavy. The Sandolo was gone. The boatman fled or taken. Poirot pocketed the mask and note, then seized Beatrice's hand. They ran. Up the spiral stairs, through the glass maze, out the iron door into the dawn. The fog was lifting. The police launch idled at the warehouse steps, uniforms shouting in Italian. Poirot paused on the ledge, water swirling at his ankles. He looked back at the warehouse, its windows now blazing with reflected sunlight, 1,000 eyes watching. Mon Dieu, he murmured, the mirrors remember. As the police took charge, Poirot slipped the sapphire-eyed mask into his coat. The game of keys was over. The game of reflections had just begun. Back at the palazzo, the Count met them in the watergate, face haggard. Niccolo has confessed everything, he said. The sale, the poison, the mirrors. He says Julia was only a pawn. The real custode is still among us, Poirot finished. He produced the red ledger. Your son built the stage, but someone else wrote the script. He opened the ledger to the sketch of La Guardiana. The Count's hand flew to his mouth. That veil! My mother wore it at funerals. She died when I was 10. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Or so the family believes. Tell me, monsieur, where is your mother buried? The Count's voice was a thread. The crypt, beside my father. Poirot turned to the police captain. Seal the palazzo. No one leaves. We return to the crypt at once. As they descended the spiral stairs, the water followed black and patient, lapping at the stone like a tongue tasting secrets. Poirot clutched the sapphire mask, feeling its weight, its gaze. Somewhere in the darkness, a woman in a mourning veil waited, and behind her the mirrors watched. Chapter 7. Interrogations in the shadows. The palazzo's wine cellar had become a tribunal. At 9 o'clock on the morning after the masquerade, the great oaken doors stood open, iron gate removed, torches replaced by harsh electric bulbs strung by the police. Julia sat chained to a stone pillar, black lace torn, eyes glittering with defiance. Niccolo occupied a separate corner. Wrists bound, face bruised where his father had struck him. The Count stood apart, arms folded, staring at the floor as though it might open and swallow him whole. Hercule Poirot presided from a simple wooden chair, cane across his knees, the sapphire-eyed mask on the table before him, like a silent judge. 7 brass keys lay in a neat row beside the red ledger and the cracked white mask. Police Captain Alberto Rossi, a thin man with a moustache like a knife blade, stood at Poirot's elbow, notebook open, pen poised. "Begin with the aunt," Poirot said in Italian. "Madame Julia, you will speak truth, or the shadows will speak for you." Julia laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Truth? In this house? The walls lie, the mirrors lie, the dead lie in their tombs. Ask your questions, little Belgian. I have nothing left to lose." Poirot's voice was silk over steel. "You stabbed the Contessa. Why?" "She was a leech," Julia spat, "sucking the family dry. Lorenzo was too weak to cut her off, so I did. Yet you wore the custode's mask. A prop. Niccolo's idea. He wanted drama." She glanced at her grandnephew with contempt. "The boy thinks legends are toys." Niccolo stirred. "You agreed to the sale. You took the money." 50,000 lire for a lifetime of servitude, Julia sneered. "Your Dubai friends pay well for ghosts." Poirot lifted the red ledger. "This G, not Julia. La Guardiana. Who is she?" Julia's smile faltered. "A fairy tale. The widow who keeps the custode's flame. Every century, one woman is chosen. She never dies. She only waits." The Count flinched. "My mother was chosen," Julia finished. "She faked her death in 78. Consumption, they said. A closed coffin. Convenient. Poirot turned to Nicolas. You knew this? Nicolas's voice was raw. I found letters in the counting house. Mother, grandmother, wrote to someone called G. Instructions. The mirrors, the keys, the orchids. She said the family fortune was hidden, not lost. That the sale was a distraction. Captain Rossi scribbled furiously. Poirot leaned forward. Describe the letters. Yellow paper, black ink, smell of jasmine. Always the same. Protect the secret. Prune the weak. The mirrors remember. Poirot's eyes flicked to the sapphire mask. And the final instruction. Nicolas swallowed. Tonight, midnight, the crypt. Bring the Count. The mirrors will show the truth. The Count's face strained of colour. My mother, alive? Or her successor, Poirot said. Traditions evolve. Captain, we require the crypt exhumed, immediately. Rossi hesitated. Signor, the tide is rising, Poirot finished, which makes delay fatal. Bring shovels. They descended in a grim procession. Poirot, the Count, Rossi, 2 officers, Beatrice trailing like a ghost. The crypt's air was colder now, water seeping through the stone floor in black rivulets. The sarcophagus marked Isabella Contarini, 1930-1978, stood at the rear, its lid carved with a mourning veil. The officers heaved. The lid shifted with a grinding screech. Inside, not bones, but a velvet-lined box. Poirot lifted it. Inside lay a woman's black lace veil, a single black orchid, pressed flat, perfectly preserved, and a brass key, the 8th, its bow shaped like a tiny coffin. The Count touched the veil with trembling fingers. Hers. She wore it the day she died. Poirot examined the key. This opened something smaller than a door, a locket perhaps, or a music box. Beatrice's voice was small. There's a music box in the nursery. It hasn't played since I was a child. They returned upstairs. The nursery was as they had left it. Broken toys, dust, moonlight. The doll's house stood open, its tiny rooms furnished with eerie precision. On the mantel sat a rosewood music box, lid carved with the Contarini crest. The 8th key fit. The lid sprang open. Inside, a roll of parchment and a miniature mirror no larger than a coin. The parchment was a letter, dated 1978, in a woman's elegant hand. My dearest Lorenzo, by the time you read this, I will be gone from the world of men. The order demands a sacrifice. I give myself willingly to protect what is ours. The mirrors hold the secret. Follow the sapphire eyes. Trust no one. Your mother, Isabella. The Count read aloud, voice breaking. Poirot took the mirror. Its back was engraved, Specchio della Verità, 1572. He angled it toward the doll's house. The reflection showed not the nursery, but the mirrored cube from the warehouse, empty now, save for the chair. Mon Dieu, Poirot breathed. The mirrors are linked. A camera obscura network, centuries old. Someone has been watching since the beginning. Captain Rossi's radio crackled. Signor Poirot, the warehouse. My men found a woman. She says her name is Isabella. They ran. The warehouse was flooded to the knees, water black and oily. In the mirrored cube, illuminated by police lanterns, stood a woman in a black veil, hands clasped before her. She was tall, thin, ageless, hair once golden, now silver, eyes the pale grey of winter canals. She wore the morning dress of 1978, untouched by time or tide. The Count stopped in the doorway, unable to move. Mamma? Isabella's smile was sad. Lorenzo, you grew into your father's stubbornness. Poirot stepped forward, cane tapping the flooded floor. Madame, you have much to explain. She lifted the veil. Her face was the Count's, aged by grief but unmistakable. I explain nothing to strangers, only to blood. Then explain to me, the Count said, voice raw. Why abandon us? Why the lies, the deaths? Isabella's eyes filled. To save you! The Order's wealth is real, hidden in the mirrors, glass within glass, gold leaf between. Your grandfather discovered it, refused to sell. They killed him. I took his place, became the Guardiana, to protect the secret until you were ready. Niccolò's voice echoed from the stairs. He had been brought under guard. Ready to be robbed? You let us drown in debt. Isabella turned to him, sorrow hardening into steel. You were never ready. You sold mirrors for to buy trinkets. The secret was never the glassworks. It was the mirrors themselves, each pane a fortune. I watched through them, waited for a worthy heir. There was none. Poirot held up the sapphire mask. And this? Isabella's gaze softened. The final key. Sapphire eyes see the truth. Place it in the cube at midnight. The mirrors will open. The fortune will be revealed, or destroyed forever. Captain Rossi stepped forward. Signora, you are under arrest for what? Isabella laughed, the sound echoing in the cube. For surviving? For protecting my family? Arrest the tide, Capitano. Arrest the fog. She moved faster than her age suggested. From her sleeve slid a thin glass blade. Murano, razor sharp. Before anyone could react, she pressed it to her own throat. Lorenzo, she said calmly, choose, the mirrors or your mother's life. The Count lunged. No! Too late. Isabella slashed, not deep, but enough. Blood welled, black in the lantern light. She sank to her knees, the blade clattering away. Poirot caught her as she fell. Pressure, here! He pressed his handkerchief to the wound. Her pulse fluttered like a trapped bird. Midnight, she whispered, blood bubbling on her lips. The cube, sapphire, eyes, trust. Her eyes fixed on the Count, then closed. The mirrors reflected her falling into infinity. The Count cradled his mother's body, sobbing like a child. Niccolò stood frozen, guards forgotten. Beatrice wept silently. Poirot rose, water swirling at his ankles. He looked at the sapphire mask, then at the cube's mirrored walls. Somewhere in the reflections a clock began to strike 11. Slow, deliberate chimes counting down to midnight. Captain, he said quietly, seal this room. No one enters until the 12th stroke. The truth is close, but it bites. As the police moved to comply, Poirot slipped the mask into his coat. The interrogations were over. The revelations were just beginning. Outside, the canal water rose higher, licking at the warehouse door like a patient predator. Venice itself seemed to hold its breath. Chapter 8. The Poisoned Chalice. 11:43. The mirrored cube in the warehouse had become a shrine to silence. Isabella Contarini lay on a stretcher, wrapped in black plastic, her blood already cooling on the mirrored floor. The Count knelt beside her, one hand clutching the mourning veil, the other pressed to his mouth to stifle sound. Captain Rossi's men stood at the four corners, rifles lowered, but eyes sharp. Water lapped at their boots. The tide had risen another handspan, black and patient. Hercule Poirot stood at the cube's exact center, sapphire-eyed mask in his left hand, cane in his right. 8 brass keys now lay in a perfect circle around the chair, each pointing inward like the spokes of a wheel. The 9th key, the coffin-shaped one from the music box, rested in the mask's porcelain forehead, inserted into a hairline slot no one had noticed before. 11:44, Rossi muttered, checking his watch. 17 minutes until the mirrors open, or close forever. Poirot did not answer. His gaze moved across the reflections. Infinite Poirots, infinite masks, infinite Isabellas dying again and again. Somewhere in the glass, a mechanism ticked. Soft, relentless, older than electricity. Beatrice appeared in the doorway, soaked to the knees, hair plastered to her skull. She carried a silver chalice, tarnished green with age, its stem wrapped in faded saffron ribbon. "I found it," she panted, "in the chapel behind the altar. There was a hollow space. It was warm." Poirot took the chalice. Inside, a residue of dark liquid, viscous, smelling of almonds and something floral. Jasmine, perhaps, or night-blooming cereus. A single black petal floated on the surface. "The poisoned chalice," he said. "The original black orchid. Distilled belladonna, concentrated over centuries. One sip, and the air sees the truth, then dies." The Count looked up, eyes red. "My mother drank this." "No," Poirot said. "She preserved it, for the worthy heir, or the final sacrifice." He placed the chalice on the chair. The mask's sapphire eyes caught the lantern light, throwing blue shards across the mirrors. 11:46, Rossi said. Poirot addressed the room, voice calm but carrying. "The mirrors are a vault, gold leaf between glass panes, layered since 1572, a fortune in plain sight, hidden by reflection." Isabella watched through the camera obscura, pruning the family like a gardener. Julia, Niccolo, the Contessa, tools. But the chalice is the lock, the mask is the key, midnight is the moment. He lifted the mask. Someone must drink, someone must wear, someone must choose. The Count rose slowly. "I will." "No," Beatrice said. "You're the last Contarini. If you die, then the secret dies with me," the Count finished. "Better that than Dubai's hands on our blood." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Courage is admirable, monsieur, but unnecessary. The chalice is not for drinking, it is for pouring." He tilted the chalice. The black liquid spilled onto the mirrored floor, spreading in a perfect circle around the keys. Where it touched, the mirrors hissed, actual steam, acrid and sweet. The reflections warped, then clarified. 11:49. The mirrors began to move. Each pane slid sideways on hidden rails, revealing narrow compartments filled with gold, ingots, coins, jewellery, all stamped with the Contarini crest. The wealth of centuries, untouched by war or tax. But something else moved too. From the ceiling descended a final mirror, square, black, suspended by a golden chain. It halted above the chalice, reflecting not the room, but a face. A woman, veiled, eyes closed, mouth open in a silent scream. Isabella, alive in the glass. The Count gasped, "Mama!" The reflection opened its eyes. They were sapphires. "Lorenzo!" the glass Isabella said, voice echoing from every mirror. "The chalice was never poison. It was ink. The truth is written in blood and gold." The black liquid on the floor began to glow, letters forming in antique script. "The worthy heir drinks not death, but memory. The unworthy sees only reflection. Choose. 11:52. Poirot understood. The chalice contains the distilled orchid, pigment, not poison. Mixed with Contarini blood, it reveals the vault's combination. Isabella cut herself to write the final message. He looked at the Count. "Your mother lives, in the mirrors, a projection recorded years ago. She knew this moment would come." The Count's hand trembled as he touched the chalice. "Then I must—" A shot rang out. The black mirror shattered. Glass rained like knives. Captain Rossi spun, pistol smoking. In the doorway stood Niccolo, freed somehow, a guard's revolver in his hand. "Enough fairy tales," he snarled. "The gold is mine." He fired again, wild at the ceiling. Plaster exploded. The golden chain snapped. The black mirror's frame fell, crushing the chalice. The black liquid splashed across the keys, eating the brass like acid. "Chaos, officers," tackled Niccolo. The Count lunged for the gold. Beatrice screamed. Poirot alone remained still. He watched the liquid spread, eating mirrors, revealing more compartments. Empty now, the gold gone. Centuries of wealth dissolved in seconds. 11:55. Niccolo laughed maniacally as guards pinned him. You think I didn't plan for this? The Dubai shipment left at dawn. The gold was melted into the mirrors they bought. You're bankrupt. The Count sank to his knees in the water, gold dust swirling around him like fool's glitter. Poirot's voice cut through the din. No, monsieur, you planned for greed, but not for memory. He lifted the sapphire mask. In its left eye socket, a tiny lens glinted. He pressed it. A beam of blue light shot upward, projecting onto the ceiling, a film grainy but clear. Isabella, years younger, in the mirrored cube. She spoke directly to the lens. If you see this, the vault is open. The gold is safe, hidden in the one place no thief would look, the masks themselves. Each porcelain face contains a hollow filled with dust. Reassemble them, and the fortune lives. Destroy them, and it dies. Choose wisely, my son. The projection ended. The room fell silent save for the lap of water. 11:58. Poirot turned to the officers. Arrest the boatman. The sandolo that left at dawn. It carried not gold, but masks. Hundreds of them, shipped as antique porcelain. Dubai bought decoys. The real treasure is here. He gestured to the warehouse walls. Behind the shattered mirrors, niches still held dozens of white masks, each cracked now, gold dust trickling from their hollow cheeks like tears. The Count stared, comprehension dawning. Mother, she outwitted us all. Niccolo's laughter died. No, it's impossible. Possible, Poirot said, when one plans for centuries. Your grandmother turned the custode's legend against itself. The masks were never death, they were life. Midnight struck. The Campanile's bell tolled 12 slow notes. The tide crested, water flooding the cube to waist height. The mirrors, corroded by the chalice's acid, began to collapse inward, a cascade of glass and gold. Poirot raised his cane. Messieurs, dames, evacuate! The palazzo sinks with its secrets. They fled as the warehouse groaned, beams cracking, water roaring in. Outside, the fog had lifted. Venice lay golden in the morning sun. Police launches idled, ready. The Count carried the sapphire mask, the only one intact, cradling it like a child. Beatrice walked beside him, hand on his arm. Niccolo was dragged away in chains, still shouting about contracts and betrayal. Poirot paused at the water's edge, looking back. The warehouse settled into the canal with a final sigh, mirrors sinking into mud, gold dust drifting like pollen. Captain Rossi joined him. The masks, how many? Enough, Poirot said. Enough to restore the Contarini name. Enough to bury it forever. The Count will choose. He boarded the launch. As they pulled away, he saw the Count on the palazzo steps, mask raised to the sun. The sapphires caught the light, throwing blue fire across the water. Poirot smiled faintly. The poisoned chalice was never death. It was choice. And Venice, mon ami, always chooses to survive. The launch cut through the canal, leaving the sinking warehouse behind. In its wake, the water closed over the mirrors, smooth as glass. But somewhere, in a crate marked fragile, Dubai, a single white mask with empty eyes smiled at the dark. Chapter 9. Chase through the labyrinth. The sun had climbed to its zenith, yet the alleys of Venice remained cold. Hercule Poirot moved through the labyrinth of Calli and Sottoportici like a bloodhound on a scent that refused to die. The sapphire-eyed mask was gone, taken by the Count at dawn, along with a single sandalo and a whispered promise, I must finish what Mother began. No one had seen him since. Captain Rossi's men scoured the city, but Venice was a city built for vanishing. Poirot, however, trusted the little grey cells. The Count would not flee with the fortune. He would deliver it to the one place the mirrors had always pointed. The original Contarini furnace on Murano, heart of the family's glass empire. Poirot hired a motoscafo at the Fondamenta Nuove. The pilot, a grizzled fisherman with one eye, took the envelope of Lear without question and gunned the engine. They shot across the lagoon, spray-needling Poirot's face, the sapphire mask's absence a weight in his coat like a missing limb. Murano rose ahead, 7 islands stitched together by bridges and canals, chimneys exhaling lazy smoke. The motoscafo nosed into the Rio de Vitrai, past workshops where master glass blowers coaxed molten sand into swans and chandeliers. Poirot leapt ashore at the Fornace Contarini. Once the pride of Venice, now a boarded husk, its sign faded to a ghost. The coat was chained, but the padlock was new, brass gleaming. Poirot produced the 9th key, the coffin-shaped one, still flecked with Isabella's blood. It turned. The gate swung inward with a wail of rust. Inside, the courtyard was a graveyard of broken crucibles and shattered Canada Sofio. Weeds choked the brick oven that had birthed a dynasty. A single set of footprints, fresh, narrow-heeled, led to the main furnace door. Poirot followed, cane silent on the dust. The door stood ajar. Heat rolled out, impossible in October. Someone had fired the furnace. He stepped into the Sala del Fuoco. The great brick moor glowed cherry red, flames licking at a crucible the size of a baptismal font. Above it on the catwalk stood the Count, cloakless now, shirt-sleeves rolled, the sapphire mask dangling from one hand. In the other, a wooden crate stenciled Fragile, Dubai. He was feeding masks into the crucible one by one, white porcelain faces melting into rivers of gold that poured into ingot moulds cooling on the floor. "Lorenzo!" Poirot's voice cracked like a whip. The Count did not turn. "You're too late, Poirot. The masks are almost gone. The gold will be recast, anonymous, untraceable. The Contarini name dies clean." Poirot climbed the iron stairs, each step ringing. "You would destroy your birthright? I would save it." The Count hurled another mask. It shattered in the heat, gold dust exploding like a star. Niccolo sold lies. Dubai wanted the mirrors, not the gold. I let them have decoys. This, he gestured to the crucible, is the truth. Enough to pay debts, restore the palazzo, silence the order forever. A clatter behind them. Beatrice burst through a side door, skirts hitched, face streaked with soot. "Uncle, stop, the police are coming. Rossi knows about the furnace." The Count's smile was weary. "Let them come. By then the evidence will be slack." Poirot reached the catwalk. "And you, monsieur? Will you be slag too?" The Count met his eyes. "Mother's message, choose wisely. I choose oblivion for the custode. The sapphire mask is the last. When it melts, the legend ends." He raised the mask. Its sapphires caught the furnace glow, throwing blue fire across the walls. Poirot's hand shot out. "No, the mask is not gold. It is memory." He lunged. The Count sidestepped. The mask slipped from his fingers, arcing toward the crucible. Poirot dove, cane clattering, fingers closing on porcelain an inch from the flames. Heat seared his gloves, the mask's edge cracked, but he held. They grappled on the narrow catwalk. The Count was taller, younger, desperation lending strength. Poirot used leverage, cane hooking the Count's ankle, shoulder driving into his chest. They teetered on the edge. Below, Beatrice screamed. The crucible belched. A pocket of gas, a roar of flame. The catwalk shuddered. A support beam snapped. The Count lost balance, arms windmilling. Poirot grabbed his wrist, heels skidding on hot metal. "Hang on!" The Count's eyes were wild. "Let go, Poirot! Let it end!" "Jamais!" Another beam gave. The catwalk tilted. Poirot's grip slipped. For a heartbeat, they hung suspended over the inferno. Then the Count twisted, shoving Poirot backward. The detective fell, landing hard on the lower platform, mask clutched to his chest. The Count plummeted. He landed in the mole's gold ingots scattering like coins from a pirate's chest. For a moment, he lay stunned, then struggled up, leg twisted at a sickening angle. Beatrice ran to him. "Uncle!" Police sirens wailed outside. Boots pounded brick. Poirot descended, limping, the sapphire mask cradled like a child. He knelt beside the Count. "You chose sacrifice, but sacrifice is not the same as suicide." The Count laughed through pain. "The gold is safe," Poirot finished. "The masks you melted were fakes, porcelain over lead. Isabella's projection lied to protect the real vault. The gold is in the fume. Walls of this furnace layered between bricks since 1572. Your mother's final joke?" The Count stared, then laughed until tears cut channels through the soot on his face. She always was the clever one. Captain Rossi burst in with 6 officers, rifles raised. "Fail me! Everyone freeze!" Poirot rose, mask in hand. "No need, Capitano. The chase is over. The labyrinth has delivered its minotaur." As medics tended the Count's leg, Poirot examined the mask. The crack ran from temple to chin, but the sapphires were intact. Inside the hollow cheek, something glinted. Gold, yes, but also a rolled parchment no larger than a cigarette. He unrolled it carefully. A map, inked in Isabella's hand, showing the palazzo's foundations. An X marked the wine cellar's east wall. Beneath, the heart of the labyrinth. "Dig here." Beatrice read over his shoulder. "Another vault?" "Or the first," Poirot said. "The mirrors were decoys. The masks were decoys. The true treasure was always beneath their feet." The Count, now on a stretcher, reached for the mask. "Give it to me." Poirot hesitated, then placed it in his hands. "You have chosen, monsieur. Now live with it." Outside, the furnace cooled with a sigh, flames dying to embers. The gold ingots, lead painted with gilt, were bagged as evidence. The real fortune waited beneath stone and time. As they loaded the Count into an ambulance motolancia, he clutched the mask and whispered to Poirot, "Tell Mother I chose wisely." Poirot watched the boat pull away, then turned to Beatrice. "Come, child, we have one last chase." They returned to the palazzo, under a sky the colour of molten glass. The wine cellar was empty now. Julia and Niccolo transferred to the questura. Poirot tapped the east wall with his cane, hollow. He inserted the coffin key into a crack no wider than a hair. Stone ground on stone. A section swung inward, revealing a narrow stair descending into darkness. Torches flickered to life, motion-triggered, centuries old. The air smelled of myrrh and salt. At the bottom, a chamber no larger than a confessional, walls lined with lead caskets. In the centre, a single pedestal. On it, a black orchid, roots wrapped around a human heart, preserved, beating faintly in a jar of brine. Beatrice gagged. Poirot's face was grim. "The first Contarini," he said, 1348, the plague heart, the origin of the Black Orchid legend. Isabella kept it here, proof that the family's wealth was built on sacrifice." He opened the nearest casket. Inside, gold bars, each stamped with a date, 1572, 1672, 1772, 1872, the fortune untouched. Beatrice whispered, "What do we do?" Poirot closed the casket. "We seal it. The Count will decide. Museum, charity, or burial with his ancestors. The labyrinth ends here." He placed the sapphire mask on the pedestal beside the heart. The sapphires dimmed, as if satisfied. As they climbed back to daylight, Poirot paused. "One mystery remains, mademoiselle. Who fired the furnace this morning? The Count was with us." Beatrice's eyes widened. "The boatman, the one-eyed pilot, he vanished after dropping you." Poirot's smile was thin. "Then the chase is not over. Venice always keeps one alley hidden." Outside, the city shimmered in the afternoon heat, canals reflecting 1,000 lies. Poirot adjusted his hat, cane tapping stone. "Come, the Minotaur may be caged, but the labyrinth still breathes." Somewhere, a one-eyed boatman rode into the mist, a crate of porcelain masks at his feet, each one smiling with secrets yet to melt. Chapter 10. The Final Unmasking. The sun bled into the lagoon at 6 o'clock, turning the Grand Canal into molten copper. The Palazzo Contarini dal Zaffo stood open to the evening breeze for the first time in days. No police tape, no guards, only the hush of a house exhaling centuries of secrets. Inside the ballroom, mirrors had been rehung, but now they reflected only candlelight and the faces of the living. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of the black and white marble square, where the Contessa had died. Before him, on a velvet-draped table, lay the final pieces: the sapphire-eyed mask, cracked but intact, the preserved heart in its jar, the coffin-shaped key, and a single ingot of pure gold, stamped 1348. Around the table stood the survivors: the Count on crutches, Beatrice pale but steady, Captain Rossi with his notebook closed for once. Niccolò and Giulia waited in separate cells at the Questura. The one-eyed boatman had vanished into the lagoon's mist. Poirot spoke, voice carrying to the frescoed ceiling. "Mesdames, messieurs, the masks fall, not by force, but by truth. Tonight we unmask the custode, not a man, not a legend, but a choice. And the choice belongs to the last Contarini." He turned to the Count. "Lorenzo, the vault beneath the wine cellar is yours. The heart, the gold, the orchid, yours. Venice watches. What do you choose?" The Count's eyes were clear for the first time since Poirot had arrived. He lifted the sapphire mask, turning it so the cracked porcelain caught the light. "My mother built a labyrinth to protect us from ourselves. My son tried to sell it. My wife spent it. My aunt weaponized it. His voice cracked. "I nearly burned it. But the labyrinth taught me one thing. Secrets rot when hidden. Gold rots when hoarded. Only truth endures." He placed the mask on the table beside the heart. "I choose daylight." With a nod to Rossi, he continued, "The gold will be melted, assayed and divided. Half to restore the palazzo as a museum of Venetian glass, open to all, free on Sundays. Half to a foundation in Beatrice's name, for orphans of the lagoon. The heart," he touched the jar gently, "will be buried with my ancestors. The plague ended at last. The masks, the mirrors, the orchids, all destroyed. The order of the saffron veil dissolves tonight." Beatrice's eyes shone. "And the palazzo will live," the Count said, "not as a tomb, but as a lantern. Tourists will come, yes, but so will children who have never seen a furnace glow. The Contarini name will mean creation, not conspiracy." Poirot inclined his head. "Bien, and the one-eyed boatman?" Rossi cleared his throat. "Caught at dawn, trying to board the Chioggia ferry with a crate of porcelain. The masks were hollow. Lead inside, gold dust painted on. He claims he acted alone, hired by Niccolò to create confusion. We believe him. The real fortune never left the palazzo." The Count smiled faintly. "Mother's last illusion." A bell tolled from San Marco. 7 slow strokes, the unmasking hour. Poirot lifted the sapphire mask one final time. "Before we end, one demonstration. The truth in plain sight." He carried the mask to the champagne fountain. Now repaired, Cupid blindfolded again. He pressed the coffin key into a hidden slot beneath the statue's base. A panel slid open, revealing a tiny lens. Poirot angled the mask's sapphires toward it. A beam of blue light shot upward, projecting onto the ceiling. Isabella Contarini, veiled, alive in memory. If you see this, the choice is made. I am proud. Live in light. The image faded. The room was silent. The Count wiped his eyes. She knew. Poirot closed the panel. She trusted you to choose better than your ancestors. You have. He turned to leave, but Beatrice caught his sleeve. Signor Poirot, what will you tell the world? He smiled, the first genuine smile since arriving in Venice. That Hercule Poirot solved a murder, uncovered a fortune, and left a city richer than he found it. The rest, he tapped the mask, is between the Contarini and their mirrors. Outside, the Motolancia waited to take him to the station. The Count accompanied him to the watergate, crutches tapping a slow rhythm. At the gangplank, he offered his hand. You gave me back my soul, monsieur. Poirot took it. You found it yourself, mon ami. I merely held the lantern. The Count pressed something into Poirot's palm. A single sapphire, pried from the mask's cracked eye. For your trouble. Poirot closed his fingers around it. For memory. The boat pulled away. Venice receded. Palazzi glowing rose and gold, gondolas gliding like black swans, the Campanile standing sentinel. Poirot stood at the rail, sapphire warm in his hand, watching the city shrink to a line of light. Behind him, in the palazzo, the Count raised the cracked mask to the ballroom's great chandelier. With a single swing of his crutch, he shattered it against the marble. Porcelain dust rained like snow. The heart jar followed, brine and centuries spilling across the floor. Beatrice opened the windows. The breeze carried the scent of salt and endings. By midnight, the ballroom was bare. Mirrors draped in white, furniture removed, the black and white marble scrubbed clean. Only one thing remained. On the fountain, a new plaque, freshly engraved, in memory of those who wore masks to survive. May light be their legacy. El Contarini, 23rd October. Far away, on the Orient Simplon Express, Poirot sat in his compartment, sapphire on the table beside a glass of tisane. He opened his leather notebook to a fresh page and wrote in neat slanted script, case closed, death behind the Venetian mask. Victim, tradition, killer, truth, verdict, justice, with mercy. He closed the book, adjusted his moustache, and allowed himself a small, satisfied sigh. Outside the window, the Alps rose like sleeping giants, their peaks catching the first stars. In Venice, the tide rose and fell, washing the palazzo's steps clean. Somewhere in the labyrinth of canals, a one-eyed boatman rowed tourists past the Contarini Watergate, spinning tales of ghosts and gold for a handful of lyre. But the mirrors no longer watched, the masks no longer lied, and the black orchid bloomed only in memory, black petals against a sky forever unmasked.